This assumption constrains the shaping of a public policy discourse that could bring the full force of shared vulnerability and commonality of experience to bear on the construction of effective problem-solving directions. An inclusive, intersectional approach that looks across gender and class divisions allows space to shift the current discourse and shape actions in two very important ways. First, it takes the focus off of fixing the victim and places the focus squarely on how can we affect change within a system. How can we look at systemic bias and its manifestations within all of the institutions and structures of the criminal justice system. It provides space for illuminating common threads, identifying consistent themes, revealing consistent practices that reinforce disparate treatment of all people of color who interface with the criminal justice system. And secondly, it guides us to connect the dots. From an inclusive framework, we can begin to look across artificial gender and class divisions to discern relationships among all who share common vulnerability in the face of criminal justice systems. This frame allows us to see the connection between the plight of Michael Brown in Ferguson and the teachers in Atlanta, Georgia. The young woman in Florida who served 20 years for abuse or trying to protect herself from domestic abuse, and Walter Scott in Charleston, in North Charleston, South Carolina. The UVA student who suffered a beating in front of a nightclub, and the most recent shooting of the victim in Tulsa, Oklahoma. These incidents represent maybe not common experience, but they represent shared vulnerability. And you need to understand that shared vulnerability. Yes, Black Lives Matter, but let's make sure that all Black lives matter.
Been in his classes. This is Dr. Larry Stokes, and he will be talking about the impact of race on the issue of public safety in the Black community.
Let me just say this in regards to, some of you heard parts of my paper the last time, and in fact it was called Structural Discrimination, Race as a Structural Factor in the arrest, the use of force, and deadly force against African American male. But then I went back to my class and I talked about it a little and realized that some people didn't know what I meant by structural discrimination. So I changed the topic to institutional discrimination, which is basically the same concept. It is institutionalized. And how can we best explain all of these incidents that have occurred here in the United States recently? In fact, I oftentimes even look at the video over in North Charleston from my years of studying criminology and teaching the information and listening to people that I know who have had personal experiences with the police. In fact, the video somewhat validates what most offenders or suspects had been saying all along, in terms of there was no reason to shoot me, but in fact the close relationship of that of the district attorney's office and that of the police department, they work hand in hand, and oftentimes the data has suggested that that they're rarely prosecuted. And this is probably one of the first cases in which there is prosecution. This one in North Charleston, as well as over in Tulsa, in which they're being charged. The one in Tulsa dealt with that of an auxiliary police officer shooting the guy with his gun, believing that he had pulled out his taser. But anyway, that's another story. But I'm not going to rehash what I said last time, but it's still, we're looking at the issue of that of race in America, and in terms of how we got to where we are currently. In fact, historical factors including slavery, black codes, Jim Crow, undergird the structural discrimination of that institutional discrimination. Du Bois noted that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line, and race remains a political issue even as I speak. Issues of race and race ideology are subverted through the proliferation of practices requiring adherence to the law of the U.S. Constitution and subordinate of African American people of color. Intended or not intended, the subordinate status of African Americans in America were laid in the foundation of the U.S. Constitution as a document that structured and defined the organization of American government and group relationships to that government as well as within society. One needs only to critically examine the Constitution that characterized African Americans as a subordinate group upon the founding of this country. In fact, if you go back to before the book that was written by, oh my goodness, Miller, it's called Before the Mayflower. And he said the reason why blacks were chosen as slaves because they had indentured service where they had they tried Indians. Indians typically they have a short life expectancy, and not only that, they knew the countryside very well, and so they can escape. They tried the Europeans. The Europeans, they could escape into the crowd, and they could mingle. But then the African Americans or the Africans coming in, they did not know the countryside. They were basically immune to the various diseases that Europeans were carrying, and they could not blend. They could not blend into with that of the dominant group. But going on as a social and political construct, race has been codified in laws, policy throughout history, culture, and political domination. Subsequently, prior to the Civil War, blacks' rights were suppressed time and time again. In Priggs versus Pennsylvania, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the Fugitive Slave Act, requiring slave owners human property to be returned. In the Van Zant, the court staggered into defining slavery as a scarce compromise in the Constitution. The status of free blacks after the Civil War was even more precarious. Judge Higginbotham wrote extensively on this condition in his classic Shades of Freedom. Judge Higginbotham outlined how the U.S. Constitution sanctioned racial hatred by establishing public policy in 1883, the civil rights cases. Even after the Civil War, the courts continued to favor policy grounded in inferiority black people and legitimization of racism through the establishment of separate but equal accommodation. In the Plessy versus Ferguson case, the European conquering African countries and captive of African slaves gave the rise to the issue of race in the United States. And the United States Constitution used the issue of race to exclude blacks as citizens. Moreover, these incidents led to white belief that they are the dominant race, which led to how race is applied unconsciously and sometimes consciously against blacks in the social structure. Despite the fact that slavery ended in this country years ago, Collins noted that the legacy of race is deeply embedded in current patterns of prejudice, discrimination against African Americans. This brief history explains how race is intertwined in the social structure and explaining why police officers use race as a determinant to arrest, use of force, and deadly force against African American males. They view African American males as a dangerous group. For police officers, this can result in overestimating young black males as a threat. The data provides subtle messages that African American lives are not highly valued. Thus, it's not unexpected for police officers to authorize race as a factor to arrest, and use deadly force against African Americans or people of color. In general, white view blacks as criminal suspects or involved in crimes which make police use excessive force and deadly force justifiable. Concomitantly, the district attorney's office may not view the shooting of black males significantly to warrant prosecution. Heretofore, prosecutors' misconduct may suggest that alleged black suspects may be guilty of something even though there is no evidence to prove otherwise. Rarely are police officers prosecuted for using deadly force against an alleged black male suspect. Reese found in about 2/3 of the incidents involving excessive or deadly force, police officers' behavior were judged to be reasonable and justifiable. He also noted that a sizable percentage of minority community had experienced police misconduct one time or another. In the U.S. versus Garner case, Tennessee versus Garner in 1985, decided when police officers can use deadly force. Since the Garner decision, that is, you can't shoot a fleeing felon unless the person is armed or endangering other people. You can't shoot a fleeing felon. Since the Garner decisions, states revised deadly force laws, and they have written the laws not for the protection of the innocent, but for innocent suspects, but for protection of police officers. In the Michael Brown case, for example, even though his hands were up, his movement toward the police gave the police justification to use deadly force. The police have a myriad of duties and responsibilities. They have to make split-second decisions to use force or not to use deadly force in terms of when necessary to resolve crime and conflict. However, blacks and other minorities have a distrust of the police. The distrust emanates from poor police community relations in the black community. More specifically, the distrust of police is based on racial profiling, excessive force, and deadly force against blacks. Police departments view these methods as effective crime control approach. Additionally, white police officers are racially insensitive of their own discriminatory practices. They interpret their own arrest data and conclude that blacks are disproportionately likely to commit crimes, thus give them justification to use deadly force, according to Kennedy. Until race, these authors assert that race is no longer an issue in America. Blacks and Latinos will continue to receive unequal justice. Race, however, is nearly impossible to eliminate. It is deeply embedded into the social system. Race extends across generations, across organizations, and across social structures in self-reinforcing cycles. Passing the disadvantage occurred by one generation in one area to a future generation in many related areas, according to Downs, 1970. So, so basically, what I'm saying is the issue is race in America. Is what Du Bois stated years ago, and the issue is still race in America. And thus I conclude. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and we are pleased to have many students show up today to hear these very important remarks, because what we would like is to generate a discussion that doesn't end today, but that continues not only on campus but beyond. And I want to title my remarks as Post-Ferguson and Black Political Participation. It could also be post-North Charleston or the many other incidents that we've mentioned. I call it post-Ferguson because sometimes it takes an event like Ferguson and all the others for there to be a serious discussion that leads to potential change. But I would start by saying politics matters. Political power matters in every society. And as you will hear in a moment, as far as I'm concerned, education is essential it's indispensable to acquiring political power. But what is political power? Political power, for our discussion here, should be considered as the ability to bring about political change and influence issues in the community. For instance, for blacks or African Americans to have political impact in this community, in the United States, they should be, have the ability to have their needs taken care of by the country. Apparently, because of what the previous speakers, Professor Jordan and Dr. Stokes, have talked about, the issues that are still there, whether they are institutional or otherwise, will be there for a long time if the black community does not learn to acquire political power. And again, as I say, it will be political power that is acquired first through education. Now, the events that we've been talking about should remind us of the deficit of political participation in the black community, and therefore should compel us to begin to discuss political efficacy and why it is lacking. By political efficacy here, I would like to borrow from John S. Jackson, who in 1973 described it as the feeling that individual political action does have or can have an important impact on the political process. And the factors that affect political efficacy include, but are not limited to, employment, the ability to have a job or a profession, to have a decent income, and to be educated. And most scholars argue or conclude that the higher one's sense of political efficacy, the higher the levels of political participation. I agree with those who stress that education is the single and most determining factor that contributes and improves political efficacy and political participation. As far back as half a century ago in 1954, Campbell and others found that blacks, southerners, and women scored lowest on this scale of political efficacy. I may argue that half a century later, even though there have been some positive changes, we can still make that conclusion today. Now, so where do we go from here? And why is it the case that these numbers 50 years after the civil rights, and after the civil rights era, we still have these problems? It's because of what has been described also as alienation from the political process. And then the question is, why are African Americans and blacks alienated from the political process? In a 2010 study, Kendra King concluded that given the historical, legal and extra-legal tactics used to suppress and subvert African American political involvement, African Americans have operated under a facade of democracy in America, a facade representing what she calls the superficial and symbolic presentation of equality, which distributes markedly different democratic tenets, such as liberty, freedom, and justice systems. In other words, in a democracy like the United States, freedom, liberty, justice are not shared equally. And the previous speakers have given you lots of examples. So, what then should be the solution? And I'll go back to my argument that education matters. You cannot be politically efficient when you are not educated. We can go to define education in different ways, but I just want to point to some of the factors that I think matter when we talk about education. There is a tendency to see education only as what we are doing today, being literate, but education should be comprehensive in the sense that education should begin where it always should begin, in the family, at home. That is where the values that matter, the values that would shape individuals who will be literate, who will be citizens, who will participate politically, that is where those values are taught. Therefore, to be educated and to be able to rise up and be voting individuals like you are now, it begins in the family. And that is where we should put the emphasis. We cannot now give the solutions, practical solutions, but I'm pointing to where it should begin. So there was a time from 2008 when we started hearing discussions about a post-racial America with the Obama presidency. We have seen prominent African Americans in positions of power: Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell, Susan Rice, and all the others, and even those in Congress, and there are very few of them. That is not what to look for, in my opinion. The fact that you have an African American president does not give African Americans political power. Therefore, those symbolic, or what I would call cosmetic aspects of power should not deter us from looking for where real political power emanates, which is from you. If you are not going to vote, if you in your community are not working together to create those structures that would help families to be solid, that would take education seriously, that would take thinking about professions seriously, that would build coalitions among those who are not like you, therefore you will not have political power. We would talk about this forever, and because we would like to have a lot of questions from you, I would conclude again by emphasizing that without education, there is no political power, and there is no political efficacy. So seize the moment, be educated, because when you are educated, future generations will be educated, and political power and political efficacy will happen. Thank you.
The different positions in the social order with varying amounts of access to the desirable things in the society. Social stratification is determined by nationality. We talk about being American. And when people talk about that in general terms, it includes everybody. But then we begin to get a little more differential. In America, race matters. So we have this organization of the society around whites, African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, and what the census kind of calls euphemistically others. So within America, the nationality, we've broken it down because of the importance of race in this society into certain categories that are determined by phenotype, by genetics. But people with B positive blood, no matter what their so-called political definition of race is, can give a blood transfusion to anybody in the human race. So race in itself is more of a political definition, and in some biological definitions, you get then the divisions between different phenotypes, facial types, size of the lips, size of hips, all that kind of stuff that we look at when we talk about race. And then the next gradation is around the issue of ethnicity. We have African Americans here, then we have people who are Jewish, people who are Italian, who are Greeks, who are Irish, and we go on and on and on, further stratifying ourselves along the lines of ethnicity. Even in the African American, and African American is a term for an ethnic group in America, because we have people who are black, who are ancestors of African people, who will tell you that I am from the Bahamas. I am not an African American. I am from Jamaica. I'm not an African American. And they do that because in this country, all of these distinctions tend to put you somewhere on that stratification scale. And finally, one of the most important things in this country is class. Class is a type of stratification that we use, and we say in this country that that we are a class society. And class has as one of its principles social mobility. Social mobility is the ability to move between the stratas in a class system. I'm a product of a working class family somewhere between the working poor and poverty. That's where I started. But because of education and because of the opportunities coming out of the civil rights struggle, I have now been able to move to what most people would classify me as middle class. But even in the structure of the black middle class, it is different in terms of wealth, in terms of ownership of property, and other kinds of things that go into the determination of your class status. All of these things matter. So in the social class system, which is very important, and I'll get into it, but I want to give you the context in which this is important. You have upper class people which represent about 1 to 5% of the population, but they control most of the wealth in the country. And they have privileges beyond imagination. Then you've got a new class now, the new money people. We used to talk about old money and new money. The nouveau riche was a term that we used to throw around in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and I'm dating myself. But now, the nouveau riche is the old money, because most of that old money, has been passed on to another generation. But we got another group of people like the Bill Gates and all those folks who have become billionaires lately. So they're the nouveau riche. And of course, all the talk now, and all the talk between now and the election of 2016 is going to be around the struggle of the middle class to stay middle class. Middle class used to be the landing point, the aspirational point for all of these people from the poverty level, the working poor, working class. If they could just get to the middle class, it was almost like saying, Lord, we have arrived. But that group is being severely impacted by the changing nature of American society and world society in general. And I don't have to go into much about the working class and the working poor. The working class is just one step above the working poor. Those are people who are earning just enough to be able to pay their bills and to struggle in life. The working poor are those folks who are laboring, most of them below the minimum wage, having to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make it. And all of you know what it means at the poverty level. Now, I said all of that to say this. We have a dual system of justice in this country. And I'll say it again. We have a dual system of justice in this country. The super rich, basically, can hire lawyers and work their way through all kinds of things. The middle class used to be able to afford good representation in the so-called criminal justice system, but because of the impact of the latest recession and other factors in the economy, they're not able to do that. And the working class and the working poor and those in poverty are really, really in serious trouble trying to navigate their way through this criminal justice system. Now, there are 2 major distinctions that people ordinarily don't talk about. The emphasis is on what is labeled street crimes. Selling drugs, robbing people, breaking into stores, all those kinds of crimes that are generally crimes against property and violent crimes like assault and all of those kinds of things. But we don't really have great discussions about white collar and corporate crime. When you look at the impact on the economy, corporate and white collar crime have a much greater impact on the economy and on this nation than the crimes we spend 98% of our time addressing. Why didn't anybody on Wall Street go to jail for the crimes that they committed, which started the recession that threw millions of hard-working Americans into almost poverty? Too big to fail. Have y'all heard that? They're too big to go to jail, too, because laws were broken, and not one of those corporate executives went to jail for doing what they did in the housing market, with bundling those loans and selling them, knowing that they were going to fail. Nobody went to jail for that. Not only did they not go to jail, most of them got substantial bonuses and raises because they helped the stockholders and all of those people in the upper class and those who are rich get more money at the expense of the middle class, the working poor, and those who are in poverty. So I'm submitting to you that we have an unjust justice system. And so when we talk about criminal justice, we need to talk about it in a holistic way and not get sidetracked and diverted without talking about the whole picture. Now, what I have expressed to you in the last 2 minutes is generally what we are up against in minority communities and the attitude in the minority community toward this criminal injustice system. When you look at what is happening in the minority communities, there is a large segment of that population that looks at themselves as victims of oppression. Now, I know this is radical, and some of you get uncomfortable when you hear radical things, but this is the truth. And the truth is relative according to your ideology in this country. So my ideology says that there is a dual system of justice, and minority communities are unjustly treated by that unjust criminal justice system. You look at the sentencing laws, you look at the length of convictions, you see who gets probation rather than jail time. All of that can be traced back to class and race. Even in the penal system, when corporate white-collar people must be convicted and go to jail, they've got a different kind of prison for them than for poor people. And y'all know I'm telling the truth. It may be uncomfortable, but it's the truth. It is empirically verified. And as scholars, and as a black scholar, it is my obligation to speak the truth as I see it. Those of you who want to challenge that truth, then we can have a real discussion. You go get your stuff, I got my stuff, and we can have dialogue. So the combination of looking at a justice system as agents of oppression then leads to social conflict and the distrust of that system in the black community. The sad part about it is that the African American community and the Latino community and the other minority communities need a functioning, honest, equal justice system. Because as I said at the last forum, we got some bad people in our community. And they choose to do bad things. Therefore, we need a justice system that does what it is supposed to do. Serve and protect. That's what they're supposed to do. But over the last 2 years now, beginning with Trayvon Martin and the latest incident in Tulsa and all in between, we've been getting more and more evidence of how unjust the system is toward minorities. And I want to thank all of you who carry those smartphones around. I heard somebody say the other day, young people, keep your smartphones charged up, because you will never know when you may come upon an incident that you need to take. Now, this is where we want to be. This is where all good, well-intended people want to be. We want a fair and equal justice system for all. In the history of African Americans in this country, we have never asked for any special privilege. Our major struggle has been for equality and equity. That's all we want. We want to be treated just like the rich folks get treated when they get into contact with the law. We're not asking to be given any special privileges. And we want to have a reduction in the negative impact of race and class on poverty, on the well-being of our community. Because when you look at the social structure, especially the economic structure of the African American community, we are basically the poorest of the poor. We live in diverse neighborhoods. We go to some of the worst schools in the inner city. All of the negative determinants of success are weighed against us. And as Dr. Stokes says, it can't be by chance. These are institutions that have been created to maintain a social stratification in this country, so that some people can do well, others can struggle by, and the rest of us do the best we can. So this is what I wanted to share with you, because too many times we're just too polite in our discussions. And I'm at a point now where I have the luxury of not having to worry about being politically correct or polite or any of those things. But I do tell everybody at every instance I have that what I say is not something that Otis Johnson has created, but the work of scholars, the data, and the other kinds of empirical evidence that allows me to say this with no apology. So at this point, we will now open up the floor for questions to any one of the four of us. And this is now your chance. I think we're about on time. We said that we would talk at you for an hour and then talk with you for an hour. So we got started about 10 minutes late. It is now 2:10. We promise you we would end at 3. I'm always willing to stay as long as you want. So questions and comments? Yes, sir. Please stand so everybody can hear you.
I guess this question is for Dr. Stokes. This is really for all four of you, but I gave you to Dr. Stokes. Was being asserted with Robert Staples in 1975 about black crime being asserted to the criminality in the community. Why is it so apparent that the colonial structure still has a grasp of crime and education in the black community, and what can we combat it with? With the colonial structure still having a strong hold on the community, what is it that we can combat it with other than knowing that it's institutionalized? What can we combat it with?
I think Dr. Bungay mentioned it earlier. He mentioned it earlier. And one of the things that I do to give students extra credit in my class, if you show me a voter registration card, you get credit. And what I'm saying is, you got to go out and vote. You got to go out and vote to make changes. Don't think that your vote doesn't count. It does. That's why Hillary rides around in a Scooby-Doo, what's it called? Van. Her Scooby van. And so what I'm saying is, you got to go and vote. Anybody that's in my class, I've been doing it for years. I've been giving extra credit. And even if you take me again, you show me the same card, you get credit over and over again.
I guess with the history of the colonial structure.
That's what I'm saying. You got to vote. You got to vote.
I understand where you're coming from, young man. There is a train of thought raised by some black militants that the black community is a colony. It is under colonial rule, where outside forces control everything in the community. And the way to do that is the same way that the African countries threw off the yoke of colonialism, the same way that India did, the same way that Vietnam did, and other countries that fought for their freedom. And I'm not talking about the military warfare, because that's suicidal. But to organize your economy, to organize your schools, to organize a social welfare system that can respond to needs in the community, you have to build an internal community so that you become less dependent on the outside. Although you're in an economy that controls not only the minority community, it controls a major part of the world's economy, but there are things that you can do. And so, young man, I would say start with voting. That is right now, it used to be a dangerous activity, but it's not dangerous anymore. But start there, educate yourself, talk about entrepreneurship, try to build independent schools, and do other things to strengthen your community.
I would just add to these remarks by saying that there is a temptation to, when you have structures that suppress you, to sit back and say, there's absolutely not much I can do about it. And do not fall into that temptation, because most of Dr. Johnson just mentioned African countries. The excuse in most of these countries is today the colonial rule is still there, through neo-colonialism. They left, we've got the flag, but they still control us. But what have you done as new nations by yourself to improve your life? And the same question we can ask here, what are you doing, especially you on campus now, to get yourselves together to advocate for those things that matter to you? And you have the power. And you begin by using the power of the vote. And getting yourself into groups and working towards certain common goals. And because without that, nobody is going to give power to you. Power is never given. When every group that has power keeps it for itself. And you've got to get out and seize the power.
Next, yes, ma'am. You have a question? All right.
I was just going to say to that young
Stand
man,
up, please.
I just wanted to emphasize, let me say, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
You have to educate yourself, so if you know that there's an issue that's concerning you, and there is somebody that's still with, all government is local, so you can still here in Savannah, Georgia, and you know what the political landscape looks like. Know who the candidates are. So you have to educate yourself about who they are. Not only do you vote, but you need to know the right person to vote for who is going to address your issue. And you have to get other people around you to work with you, because there is power in numbers. And then once that person gets in, you just can't let them in and decide, okay, I voted, so I don't have to do anything else. You have to make that person accountable. So, as they said, educate, vote, but then make accountable, make accountable.
There is something that we often said in terms of building these movements. You have to organize, you have to educate, you have to mobilize, and take action. Organize, get people together of like minds, then educate yourself about what the facts are, then go out and mobilize people by helping them understand that is their best interest to get involved, and then to take action. Talking about it ain't gonna get anything done. And we have another saying about the paralysis of analysis. We can sit down among ourselves and we can talk about how bad they are and how something needs to be done. Well, if something needs to be done, start it with you. But it's safe to just criticize and have all these opinions that everybody has. Yes, sir. This is an activist from a long time ago.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I just wonder if we can have a genuine dialogue if we keep that conversation within the status quo. I know for a fact the genuine change comes through direct action. It's not the vote, then you do something. You should do something, then you get what comes after you do something. If we look at the civil rights movement. There was Niagara movement, there was Harlem Renaissance, there was a lot of intellectual, cultural, but it wasn't until people began to leave universities and go to Mississippi and Alabama and go to sharecroppers and go to workers, and those people began to actively engage the system on their own behalf, that the things that we say, Voting Rights Act, and those things that come first, they came after. And so, if we do not have radical intellectuals, if we do not have direct action, if we do not have independent economic vehicles, because when those kids went to jail, somebody owned some property, some businesses, some houses, so they could go bail them out.
Exactly.
So the fact that so segregation had a positive effect for us in that we had independent economic vehicles. So that when we did act, we didn't have to depend upon a paycheck. Well, but my question is then, how can you have a genuine dialogue without including those kinds of things in the conversation? The question for me is really not about public safety, it's about public order. The system works the way it's supposed to work.
For whom it's supposed to work.
For whom it's supposed to work. And so when cops do what they do, that's not about public safety, that's about public order. That's about maintaining what is. And in fact, the most impressive thing I've heard has to do with how do we now take it from just about individuals to about families. Disabled African Americans have issues. Women African Americans, student African Americans have issues, not just men. As a family unit, even though we talk about Trayvon and Eric Garner, in the same conversation, we will talk about the dysfunction of our families. And I'll end with this. I read something from the CDC that said that from birth to 5, black males were more present in the lives of their children than any other group of men. I'm a conscious person, and when I read it, I said, no, that's not true. I had to read it again. Why? Because I'm convinced that black men are absent in the lives of their children. Why? Because even though I can have sympathy for the guy shot in Tulsa, there's something wrong with black people. And until I can get past that and we can have conversations that attack those things. And so the issue is not about you or me, it's about our family. Yes, because if something happens to her, it hurts our family. If something happens to me, it hurts our family. And what we're learning now is we cannot allow, somehow in the 60s, a small group within our community was catapulted into another class. And our conversations tend to be viewed through the lens of that class. There are 40 million African American people in this country. You can't get this many folks to set the tone of the conversation for those people and then wonder why nothing changes. So I would like to see, if it is possible, to have a conversation that really is more about what the system really is, how it works the way it should work. And Dr. Stokes is clear. We need to talk about the fact that African people were brought here because we had the skills to make the system work. Anybody can raise rice. Anybody can raise indigo. Anybody can mine for gold. So we were, as Africans, we were capable of doing those things. So that's why Africans were sought after, because we had those kinds of skills. And those kinds of skills produced the raw materials for the Industrial Revolution. At the start of the Civil War, there was nothing in this country worth more than black people, except the land.
All right, I think yeah, he still has a fire in his belly. And I also think you've given us a topic for our fall forward. Since I became a scholar resident at Savannah State, every quarter we have a forum. And we try to address issues that are pertinent to the day. So I can tell you now that in the fall, we will have a discussion on the structure and function of the black community. And then we can go into some real in-depth discussion at a beginning level about what we need to do to move from where we are to where we could be and should be. But your future is in your hands. Nobody's going to take care of your future. They're taking care of their future. And I applaud them for it. I ain't angry at them. Because they're doing what they're supposed to do. They're taking care of their families. They're taking care of the economy that allows them to have the level of standard of living that they have. And we are running around here complaining and moaning and blaming everybody. Well, as the brother said, some of that blame must come to us. Next question or comment. Yes, sir.
They talk about social stratification and classism and education in the black community in order to gain us, political influence. But what happens when you look at, I guess, the Atlanta test trial? They just had trial about the cheating scandal, and that system were helping the students.
Were they helping them? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The teachers were basically helping the students cheat for the standardized test.
Helping them cheat, yeah.
But the thing is that the system is proven multiple times that the system is not for the success of the students. The students aren't being educated. Students are being taught the test. So what happens when the student is not able to learn the test? And he's not being able, he or she is being able to, get the education that we think they deserve. So, and the teachers recognize that. So what happens when they try to equal the playing field, but it's not necessarily justice as given as cheating? What happens then? Because then those students who are giving the help, their test doesn't count. So now they're back in the system and they're looked down upon. The teacher just served 20 years for helping the students try to advance and get the political influence that they might be able to achieve in the future. So what happens when that offset?
Let me speak to you as an elder, young man. What color was the superintendent of the Atlanta Public School System? Talk to me. Anybody? Black. Did you see any white teachers among the ones that were caught cheating and now paying the price for cheating? Did you see any whites in that?
They were cheating.
Man?
They were cheating.
They were cheating. Okay. It's just like when we do something, they're always looking for hope. So there were 2 out of how many?
Over 35.
All right, over 35. Now, we live in a society that loves to text. And so, there are certain things that you are supposed to teach between the grades. When you come to kindergarten, it is expected that you will have a certain beginning knowledge base. And from kindergarten to 1st grade, you're supposed to achieve some things that they'll prepare you to go to 1st grade. Now, if I help you cheat and you haven't learned what you're supposed to learn to do well in 1st grade, have I helped you or have I set into motion something that will handicap you for the rest of your life? These are tough moral questions. And I know there's some people in here don't like exactly what I'm saying, but I'm sorry. These are tough moral questions. I've worked with this public school system in an absolute separate way for more than 10 years when I was the executive director of the Youth Department. Every year, we had high retention rates in first grade. If children are coming to first grade not prepared to do first grade work, there has to be something done to help them master what they're supposed to master by the end of the first grade. Every year, this year won't be any different. There are high retention rates in the middle school grade at first grade, which says that children came from elementary school to middle school not prepared to succeed at middle school. Every year, including this one, there will be high retention rates in the 9th grade, the first grade of high school, where high school teachers say that the children did not come prepared out of middle school. Every year, there are graduates, and I'm talking about something I know, and I know I could generalize. Every year, there are graduates of this public school system that get admitted to Savannah State that have to take remedial courses because they didn't master what they were supposed to master in those 12 grades. Now, you can look at culprits and villains and all that you want, but until we come to grips with the issue that our children are not succeeding, and many of the people that are entrusted with helping them succeed are not doing what they're supposed to do, and be able to say that because that's a minority. It's just like the ramp on black men. Only 10 to 15% of black men commit crimes, but the emphasis is on them rather than on the 85%. So we've got to put the emphasis on the good teachers who take those young people who have extraordinary needs and do for them what they deserve. White, black, polka dot, I don't care what color they are. And I'm not going to make excuses for professional educators who do not educate. All right, give me some blowback if you want to. I can stand it.
One thing that I do want to say about it, and it goes back to what we were saying earlier about the criminal justice system. We have a public education system that also needs to be challenged.
That's right.
And it needs to be challenged based on the fact that since 1954, and those of us who know what happened in 1954, we have been struggling to try to figure out how to educate a general populace. And the students who have most suffered have been the students of color. What has happened since then, we have also in place a funding system of public education that in effect it has its own built-in inequities. And that funding system has ensured that resources are not equally distributed among schools. So we have kids who are getting less resources, and those are usually the students who need the most resources. I see you shaking your head.
No, because they get all kinds of extra money in these.
That extra money, the Title I money and Title I money has now become fungible across all programs. So it is no longer designated for specific school or specific programs as it has been.
Then what are we as a community doing to make sure that that funding is accurate?
I understand there's personal responsibility, but I also say there needs to be systemic awareness. I definitely agree with personal responsibility, but being aware of what's happening in the public education system is extremely important if we're going to make fundamental change and ensure that students have access to quality educational experience. The question of the Atlanta teachers, and the thing that most upset me is that I am very much aware of a number of cases across the country, all across in El Paso, Texas, in Denver, Colorado, in, Rhode Island, in a number of cities across the country where teachers did similar things. The question about this case in Atlanta goes back to what we were talking about the criminal justice system, and then unequal treatment before the criminal justice system. These teachers in Atlanta were charged with a RICO violation, and a RICO violation that is generally held only for mobsters, gangsters, politicians, and politicians who steal from government. These teachers were therefore overcharged in terms of the crime. They should, bad judgment, I agree. They shouldn't have done what they did, and they should have had a punishment. But to be sent to jail for 7 years for erasing the test is, I think, absolutely ridiculous. And it does go to what we were talking about earlier, that we, African Americans, in the face of the criminal justice, are overcharged, overpunished, oversentenced, and this case, more than any, proves that.
Well, there will be appeals, and so hopefully they will have good lawyers who can.
But those other, okay, yes, ma'am.
Well, resource-wise, when we're talking about the school system, I'm coming from the DeKalb County school system, and I was in ROTC in high school, and looking at my books that we haven't got new books since probably 1990s. When I go to McEachern, a school in northern Georgia, their books are updated. They have the resources, they have the school that they need. So to say that that these children have the resources, they don't. Like, I'm going to school reading a book that needs to be updated. Books need to be updated because we're all taking the same test. We all have to be judged on the SAT, ACT when we're going to college. So if we're going to go on this system, or we need to be judged on the books that we're receiving. We need to be judged on these 1990 to maybe 1865. Like, it doesn't make sense.
Where are the parents in that school who should know that and should organize and protest against that kind of inequity?
No, that doesn't make sense. So my parents are to be blamed because the school system is taking care of me. When my mother sends me to school, she is giving my life to the school system for what, 8 hours? When I go to school, this school system should be able to take. When I go to school, this school system should have the books that I need. It's a public education, so therefore I should have the resources that I need.
All right, yes, sir.
So I have, I guess, a great thing to say, and I do just facts. One is that because public schools are, funded by the property taxes, plus other, funds that are coming from the government, because they're funded by the property taxes, schools like the school I went to in Stone Mountain is going to be less funded and less able to educate equally the children in the county that I attended high school than, say, in like Gwinnett County or any other county around, in the metro area. That's just facts. Also, you're saying that whole Atlanta cheating scandal, what happened wasn't just so much of cheating. Yes, there should be a moral and, I guess, ethical code that all teachers should abide by. That's absolutely, understandable, without a doubt. But there also should be a moral and ethical code on the actual code that, limits the student and limits the teachers from helping them succeed. And what I'm saying is that, just like you said before in the SAT and the ACT, that's what matters. That's what gets us into college. The CRCT that we have to take to get into high school, to come out of elementary school, that is for the government to basically to gauge and standardize their list of their numbers off of the amount of educated people in this country or the amount of the educated children. Our standards that we want to live up to, the SAT, ACT, to further our lives, come second to what the government wants for us and wants for the children. So the teachers did have to further, put an extra something to help those kids, because the standard that we want is not the standard that they want for us. So that's two. And number three is that although, I agree with 110%, the charges were very severe, and the charges were also, very outstretched, and they were, put out there. But when it comes to facing other crimes, like that's just sad. It's because they were of the African American descent, because the superintendent at the time was, African American, and it's because of the color of my skin, because of the skin of the teachers at the time. That's why, but 6 years, 8 years later, why it's still such a big case. And I feel like, in this country, because of race, the justice system puts so much, emphasis and so much news coverage on it that, we're the victimized individuals, regardless of, what the crime was going to be, be the perpetrator. And I think that's also is a shame as well.
All right, the young lady right next to you.
I just kind of want to give examples of like, I feel like I can clarify on like her point and his point, because also as a product of the DeKalb County of Public High School, Stonewall High School, and I was also at ROTC, and I can agree with what she said. Even ROTC, which is like an extracurricular activity, there still wasn't funding in the school-wide line for us to have updated books. So like you have textbooks in ROTC, and he's not even in the classroom, which is the core, which is the sole like, like of the schools of the most it's a priority. That's what it's for. It's a priority. For example, the CRCTs in middle school, we had to be taught to the test, and we weren't like, the teachers were like teachers who cared, felt the pressure of teaching so that the students could retain the information, understand it further, and teach it to an objective is what they called them. And it's like, well, the student might be like, well, I don't understand. Well, we have to move on because we have to get these many objectives for the end of the year because you have to pass this test. Not you have to understand it. For example, like American government class, and we want to vote. Like we want to be a community that can grow and vote, logic, like informed and make informed votes. But in a classroom, when we're trying to understand who should we vote for, why should we vote for them, what do we look for, it's like, well, we really don't have time for that. Even the teacher who wants to give us that information is like, we don't have time because we have to make sure you just get objective 5.1 and then 5.2 and then 5.3. And it's like the teachers, not like everyone said, that what they did isn't right, but I feel like the teachers who did help those students, at least one of them, did it because they knew that the student didn't have the opportunity that they could have had in the classroom to learn the information in its entirety. Like, you may not understand any of the concepts on any of these standardized tests, like the Georgia High School Graduation Test, the SAT, the SAT, the CRCTs, or the ELCTs as a whole, but you just might understand it enough to take the test and get a decent grade so that you can go to the next grade with that partial information. So, yeah, that's kind of how.
Okay, so my comments, my 2 cents in my pocket. I think that we're also taking some things out of context, and we truly do not appreciate the efforts of our ancestors. There was a point in time in this country where we were not permitted standard education. And I'm not sure how many people in this room have gone to Summerton, South Carolina, but you might want to make a trip to Summerton, South Carolina, because before there was Brown versus Board of Education, there was Summerton. And the story behind Summerton, which led to Brown versus Board of Education, was that African Americans woke up at the crack of dawn in the morning, did our chores, walked 3+ miles to the school, walked 3+ miles back home at night, did our evening chores, and woke up every day and did this. Did our mothers and grandmothers have education? No. But they knew the significance of education, and they impressed that upon us. They made sure that when we got home from school, we got our lessons. So I understand the being upset at the school system and the teachers, but we've lost a degree of owner's equity where we send our children to school prepared to learn. I am quite confused. How is it when we had no books, we excelled academically? Now our children have smart devices and they've been dumbed down. So I'm quite confused where we're blaming teachers and other people saying, well, the teacher didn't teach my child, the school system stole from my child. As a community, we need to have a certain amount of owner's equity. Are we sending our children to school prepared to learn?
How many blacks are on the DeKalb County Board of Education?
Oh, he had girl, they got me here all day.
And the property and one of the things that needs to be changed is the funding of schools based on property value. But some of the highest property in the state of Georgia is in the county of DeKalb. So I'm not sure whether they have a fiscal problem. I know they got a political problem. So and see, this is why we need to have these discussions. We will, us old folks like me will probably never change your mind, but I want to implant a seed so that you will check out what my position is. And a lot of times when you do more research and get past the emotional stage, you'll find out that a lot of the problems that we have are internally inflicted. The majority of the people on that DeKalb school board is black. And you talking about not having up-to-date school books, whose fault is that? How can you blame that on the white man?
It's not on the white man. We're not blaming it on the white man. We're blaming it on
Respect your elder. Show that. Show the cyclical first.
I'm sorry. I'll look over there and speak.
You're passionate. You're passionate. You're passionate.
Let me say this.
Wait a minute. Now see how we can slip off into stuff.
Let me say this. If you now, because I'm sure someday you'll be in a position of leadership and modeling, okay? She made an excellent point. If we keep this conversation within the status quo, we will continue, it will be a cycle. They will be talking about you, not supporting it, not. Someone told Thurgood Marshall and his team the same incident. The guy's name is Judge Waring. They were concerned about equity and resources. He said what would be a better idea is if you go for integration. Because the system is never going to give you equity and resources unless your children are in the same classroom. So if your children are in the same space, then you can have equity. He led them to take that. They knew what they were talking about. He led them to take that conversation in a different direction. And we're dealing with that today. They're getting ready to reauthorize the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It's a 1965 Civil Rights Act. It's being turned on its head. And the same people who are going to prison now in 2001, when they came with NCLB, those principals, those teachers understood that was some crap. But because they're stuck within the status quo, they can't argue. They said we have to make the best of it. And the best of it landed them, some 3 of them doing 25 years in the penitentiary. You're going to do the same thing if you will not begin to question us from what is best for me, what is best for my children, what do we need to do. And I'm telling you, the people who can do something about it are not in this room. But you can help those people. You can help the mothers who are facing the same situation that this young lady talked about. There are mothers and fathers who are facing the same situation today. We can have these kind of conversations, but they need the information and the result of this discussion.
I'm very happy that we are getting energized. And let me just underscore what I said earlier. It is very important to pay attention to politics. Political power matters. But in order to have political influence, you've got to be very smart. And to be building the kinds of coalitions, to educating yourself in ways that can achieve what you want, requires that you start building those coalitions here and now. And you can only begin to build coalitions for certain objectives if you know what you are looking for. Which comes back to what I was insisting about, which is education. If you educate yourself, and in the groups you have on campus about the issues that matter, then the election results that you've been seeing since the last couple of years, you'll be able to shift them the way you want. Look at the last midterm elections. You know, how many of you voted in the midterm elections? Good, excellent. But the majority of people did not vote. So think about that and educate yourself on the issues that matter to you and begin to build the coalitions that will lead you to be leaders. So that we move away from emotions, discussing things and getting emotional about them, but looking things in the face and being realistic and building the smart coalitions that can lead you to political power. Without political power, the education system will not change. The policies that you need will not happen.
The discussion today has been invigorating. I wanted to say something. The sister over here, you mentioned Somerton. I grew up hearing about Somerton, Briggs versus Elliott. And today, we need to know about Briggs, Crying 2, Graham, but we also need to know about Freeman versus Pitts, because Freeman versus Pitts has essentially overturned the Brown decision. And we need to study that, and we do need to educate ourselves, and an educated person is a person that continues to learn. It doesn't stop with a degree. You must continue to learn, and we want our children to read. People were lynched because they wanted to read. They were lynched because they wanted to vote. So now the lynching, we need to find out what kind of lynching is going on today. But you must read and educate yourselves. And Judge Waring, yes, he did so much for, in the case of Briggs versus Elliott. I'm so glad someone.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
All right, I just want to say this. When we look at the education system, yes, politics can help. Yes, education itself can help. Yes, we can elect these officials to help organize monetary allocations. And yes, we can educate within ourselves. But the thing is that we're talking about high school and middle school children that were raised in the inner city, they're poor. These kids, they don't have the resources to just go out and think to themselves that I need to go out and educate myself. So they go to school to do that. School itself is not equal for all kids. School itself is not equal for blacks. You can hit, excuse my language, you can hit a nigga, his wound's gonna heal in this system. You can hit a nigga, but his wound's gonna heal. You can kill a nigga, he's gonna be all right. But if you educate a nigga, that's the worst thing you could ever do in this system. You got teachers that got 20 years in prison for what? For helping the brother try to make up for what he did in the classroom, because she knows that in the classroom, like you said, he wanted to learn about this, the political system. This nigga can't vote. He don't know nothing about the political system. So in order for that to help, she tried to help him on the test. Yes, like you said, there should be a code of ethics in the classroom on when and where that can help. And we all know that cheating is cheating. You can't, there's nothing about that. But the fact is that in the classroom, it's also cheating in the classroom. The system cheats the students, because the students can't learn what they should learn. There's a gap in between 8th grade and 9th grade, because there's a system between 6th and 8th grade that says they need to be here to here. But it doesn't say they need to be from 8th grade to 9th grade. What's that gap right there? The gap is that 2 months they've been out of school. Nobody's telling them, go to the library, go read this, go look on your phone. Yeah, we got smartphones, but we ain't learned Jack in school, so we got to learn Jack over summer. But the thing is that once you fix the system to where it's no longer helping the system itself, but helping the kids learn, then that's when we can find a great answer for the problem.
I just have a comment.
Will you please stand up?
I think that people kind of blame the system too much, because I'm a firm believer, if your child is only getting an education at school, then they're in the education, you have to educate at home as well. That's where it starts. And I think
Oh, which one? This lady right here?
I was just going to say, to piggyback off of what Martha said and what she said, it's about what you teach at home, and we don't, I think as a race of people, we don't take enough responsibility to say, what have I not done to advance this child? Because you go, children, like we said, over the summer, they go home, they didn't learn anything in school, so they don't have that motivation to say, oh, let me look this up on my smartphone and learn some more. But if they don't have anyone in their ear telling them, you need to do this, you need to do that, there's things that you don't know. But if no one's taking responsibility, then that child will never learn anything on top of what they don't learn in school. So then they get to where we are, they get to college, and all these things are coming at them. Why didn't I learn this before? Because not only did they not learn in school, but no one ever took the time to tell them, you need to learn this, you need to learn that, this is what you don't know. And it's up to us in college, after we graduate from college, to teach the ones that are coming up. In between that time, during that time, this is what you need to know. Just responsibility.
I'm not necessarily, like when I say, when I talk about the County School System, I'm not necessarily blaming the County School System. I'm in college, you know, I'm about to graduate. I've been out of the country, so I'm not blaming this system for anything. I'm just saying that in order, if we want to sit here and blame the students and the parents, then we need to blame the system too. It's not fair. If we're gonna judge something, we need to judge it all. We can't just pick and choose every little option that we think is not okay. Because I just can't really understand why my brother, sister, you all are like, and it's not outside of this room also, just our race is all, our race and all. We're very quick to judge, we're not very quick to judge, we're very quick to blame us and blame ourselves and not blame everything at all. And now if I see my brother or sister in the street, you know, doing something stupid, I'm gonna walk up to them like, come on. You know, I live off East Moulton. I'm not from here, but I live off East Moulton. If I see a kid down the street, I'm gonna address it. And that's what I shall do for my brother and sister on the street. But just as I'm gonna say something to that person, I'm gonna say something to the teacher. I'm not gonna sit here and just try to act like the system isn't helping us, because it is. It wasn't set up. It was not set up to educate a black brother and sister. Now back, not to say your time, because I'm not trying to, make you older.
I'm 21.
Back in, let's say, the 50s and the 60s, it was really a sense of urgency within our black community to see the black brothers and sisters rise up. Now, when we come more into this 21st century, we don't see it anymore. All we see is just blaming young black brothers and sisters, instead of saying, well, what can I do? What can I change in the system? I'm going to act like when I graduate, when I matriculate on into my career, into this education career, I'm not going to sit here and blame the student. I'm going to come to the student. Well, what is it? What is it that you feel that you are not learning? Me personally, I don't agree with this whole system of just when we talk about African American history. I don't agree with the whole system of most black kids. They only know of African Americans as slaves. They don't know anything. They don't know anything pre-slavery. So if you bring a black child into a system where it's just you are nothing but a slave, then I mean, what do you expect? Or you bring a child into a system where their teachers don't even care for them. My high school teacher, my basketball coach, told her right here she isn't going to go anywhere. She's coming to HBCU. She told her she isn't going to advance in her career because she's coming to HBCU. So I'm not gonna. I won't and I will never blame any black child in the system or any of that in that system of the consequences, because it's not all their fault. It has a lot to do with the system put into place that isn't really pushing young students to advance themselves. It's more so pushing them to advance an agenda just to basically become a consumer, like we're talking about political theory. Most of everything that from the point I'm born to this point now, it's just being taught to be a consumer. Now somebody in the education system really teaching me to advance myself, to advance my thinking skills, then therefore it's going to be a